pop up on the screen also that we are live streaming?
Sure is.
Okay. So then I will, yes, we're on YouTube. Perfect. So now let me unspotlight myself, but I'm here. There is a Q&A box I want to share because I have upgraded my Zoom for this meeting. So there should be down on the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question that you're hoping, if we have time, we'll get to questions, but we kind of pre-prepared topics that each of our speakers felt really comfortable talking about. So that will take up most of our time, but put them in the Q&A and we'll see if we can get them in after. All right, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. Jessica, I have a no strict no crying rule, which you almost made me break. Um, but that's right. I do a lot of work in the size inclusive grading and design space, working directly with designers and sometimes with people who work in third party publications like magazines to help them make sure that they're serving their audiences in the way that they intend to, with respect to their values. So we have a handful of really amazing panelists that you have invited here today. And we had a lot of kind of questions come up in the Facebook group that we're hoping to help address here as we work on getting y'all some great information about creating the sweater that you see in your mind and imagine for your body when you start out. Um, and so that's going to lead us right to our first question. So I'd love to invite Hortense to share some thoughts about that first step, about picking that garment that you're going to embark on knitting.
Hey everyone. Sorry. So before you even start worrying about whether it's going to fit and what measurements you should take and ease and all those details that we are going to talk about, don't worry. I just wanted to make sure that everyone look at patterns with what I like to call your shopper's eyes and not your knitter's eyes. As knitters, we like to look at the stitches and the colors and look at it from the perspective of we're going to knit the thing. But you should look at it like you would in a shop when you're buying a sweater or whatever other garment you're going to buy. What are your criteria then should be your criteria when you're looking at patterns, because you can make the most gorgeous sweater. But for example, if you make a gorgeous or bright orange form-fitting sweater, it might fit perfectly. But if you're someone who never wears anything but a loose gray sweater, you're just not going to wear it. And that would be a waste. So we want to make sure we check our wardrobe, go to your closet and have a real look. Like, look at your sweaters, look at your tops. What are like common things? What are the kind of colors you actually wear? What are the kind of fits you actually like? Do you like things to be loose or form-fitting? Do you like sweaters to be like heavy or light and fluffy? What kind of shaping do you like? Where do you like to have some extra room for comfort or not? So that you know what fit you're going to want to aim for. If you don't know what you're looking for to get the fits, you can do all the math and have like all the perfect knitting and perfect gauge and perfect everything. If you don't know what you're going for, it's not going to work out.
Thank you. Absolutely. And, I'm going to chime in after our panelists share with some size inclusive thoughts and some background for some of the things that the designers are navigating on the design side as they bake size inclusive design principles into their work. So one thing that I will often suggest to my makers who work with me who have plus size bodies is you can steal from the Sewist toolkit. You can make what's called a muslin, which is a mock-up of your size. We know that if you're knitting a larger size, it's a much bigger investment. You're going to have much less information about what it looks like on other bodies like yours. And in general, the industry is pretty new to grading for those sizes. So you're also kind of at the cutting edge of that particular technology. But you can take your swatch, go to a fabric store and get some inexpensive clearance stretch fabric that matches your swatch pretty closely from the back of the aisle, and then cut out the dimensions of your schematic and give them a quick safety pin together and put it on. And that could help you predict your fit or help you say, maybe this pattern isn't for me, or I need to make this adjustment. So it doesn't always have to be about the math. We're excellent with our visual skills. We can usually look at things and see what we'd like to change. So steal that tool. And so that kind of takes me to my next question. Understanding how a garment is going to fit starts with understanding the relationship between your body's dimensions and your garment's dimensions, right? Which is something that we call ease. And we have with us today Heather Swan, who owns a local yarn store and works with knitters who are navigating this all the time, and has a really great way of explaining ease and how you can use that to anticipate how your garment is going to fit. So Heather, you want to give us our primer on ease?
Yes, thanks, Jen. And I really appreciate getting to be here with all of these wonderful designers. I'm like in heaven. So when it comes to ease, the biggest issue that I think sometimes people don't consider is when a designer is talking about ease, they're typically telling you that this sweater was designed with X amount of ease. So actually, the sweater I have on right now is called the Breaker by our own Jen P. And she, in her actual pattern, which I pulled up just to make sure I had all the right details, but with this, she tells us that there is to be 4.5 inches or 11 and a half centimeters of ease. And what that means is that if you can see, my arm is this size under here. Actually, I have a zipper. I can just unzip this. So my arm is this size here, but when I put on the sweater, you'll see that there is some room there, and it is not squeezing my arm and stuff like that. So when we're looking at when someone is talking about ease, there is negative ease, there's zero ease, and there's positive ease. So negative ease is usually what you're going to see when you're dealing with socks, or like if it's a form-fitting tank top. That's going to be something that's going to be a little bit tighter to your body. It's going to cause your fabric to stretch across your body to fit it. Zero ease is where it fits your body perfectly. So if you have a 52-inch full bust, your garment is going to be 52 inches, the same as what your bust size is. But when we're talking about positive ease, and this is where I feel like a lot of people really get confused, is when they're reading the schematics or when they are reading the dimensions that are given to them, they're like, oh, okay, well, I have a 38-inch full bust, and this sweater tells me that size 3 is 38-inch full bust. But if you have not reviewed the notes to tell you that it's actually meant to have 4 to 6 inches of ease, you're not going to want to do that size. You're going to want to take your 38, you're going to want to add 4 inches to it, or 6, and you're going to want to be in the 42 to 44 inch full bust size. So when you have pattern writers that are really great about putting the exact dimensions, and those dimensions are what the garment size is, not what your body is. And that's what we have to try to really remember, that I think sometimes can be difficult. So making sure that when we're reading the size of it, and then that also slides you right into the conversation of you get to pick your ease. And so for me, I am a bigger girl. I am usually making anywhere from like a 4 to 6 or an XL to triple XL, depending on the pattern. And there are certain parts of my garments, like the top, my shoulders and my bust, I want more fitted, but my arms and my hips, I want looser. So I have to make those adjustments in there, and I have to do it all with taking into consideration the amount of ease that I want in the different parts of my garment when I'm talking about sweaters specifically.
Thank you so much, Heather. One of the things is for me is that I often work with knitters who've been knitting a very long time, and so it's always really nice to have the perspective of somebody who works with people who are just making their first sweater or their second sweater, and they're just kind of on that journey to begin getting their fit right. In size inclusive design, one of the foundation principles is that, except in very specific circumstances, everybody should have the same amount of ease, right? So, if the size 4 has 4 inches of ease at the bust, so does the size 12. And that can create some challenges, right? Because the relationship between our body measurements does not change consistently. So, our necks and shoulders, they don't get much bigger as we get bigger. The shoulders get an inch or two, maybe 3 inches wider from a size 1 to a size 12, but that full bust goes from 28 inches to 70 or 72 inches. And so, back when we used to only make 3 sizes of patterns and they were all, right in the middle of the range, those relationships don't change much in the middle of the range, but they diverge a lot at the ends of the range. And so, designers who are doing size inclusive design have to first choose the methodology that's going to kind of be the formula that they apply. But then there's some subjective art and finessing that goes into, one, making sure that all of those sweaters look the same, fit the same, but also then making sure that the instructions that come out of that are pleasant for the knitter, right? And so there's some trade-offs that the designer has to make in terms of what their customers are looking for in terms of not just fit, not just visual, but also the making experience. And ultimately, the knitter gets to decide, right? I'm glad that you said that. That's on my list of key points too. The designer's job is to provide designs that are consistent across the size range. Knitter then gets to choose which one is for them and if they want to change those measurements. And so that kind of brings us then to our next topic, right? So if your body goes inside the schematic, that's another way I've heard people teach newer knitters how to understand this. Your pattern's going to come with a set of measurements and your body goes inside of those measurements. What do we need to know about schematics? How are we going to use schematics to predict our fit? And there's other tools in patterns too. And so I'm going to kick it over to you, Mary Beth, and hopefully you can tell us what should knitters be looking for inside of the actual pattern itself to make sure that they're going to get a great fit. What can they use in there?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. And thanks to everybody on this panel. And I know everybody's going to say it, but Jen did a fantastic job pulling all of our mini areas of expertise together on this. Because I thought, yeah, I'm all about fit, but what do I have to say? And when you said the things that are in the pattern, I'm like, yes, because I am all about the nuts and bolts of a pattern and all the information that is in there that you can use to help you get the fit that you want, or to decide that, oh, this pattern isn't actually going to work for me. As Jen says, you want a good maker experience. So, as Hortense says, start with your shopper's eyes. We've all been to the store. We think something's cute. We try it on. It doesn't work. How many pairs of jeans do you try on before you find the one that fits? Because that particular designer has a fit model that's more like you. So that is a great place to start. And then Heather talked about ease. How much ease do you want? Patterns will have a variety of information for you. There's your body measurements, there's your finished measurements. People say, well, do I make the size 34? Do I make the size 38? I have a 34-inch bust, but I don't know. So as much as you can, try to get that information. Sometimes it will be in the description. It will say there are schematics in this pattern. Sometimes in a Ravelry column of photos, you'll see a schematic at the bottom. You can always ask the designer or check with on the project page, and you can search for the word schematic within it, and maybe somebody's talked about it. You can search for the word ease and see what people have to say about that. So there's a lot of information when you're searching for a pattern. And then once you get it, you can use that information to maximize the fit for you. So if anyone is not familiar with the term, when I say schematic, what I'm talking about, here's an example. This is the little diagram that any decent pattern is going to have for you. They don't all, amazingly still, but this is just one example of a pullover with a set-in sleeve. Well, this is a vest. It doesn't have a sleeve. There would be another thing if there was a sleeve, and it has a saddle shoulder. There are these little tabs. So that's that. And then all of these measurements are going to tell you the size of the finished garment. Now, when you are making that, the stitch counts that give you those measurements are based on the gauge in the pattern. So if you are getting exactly that gauge, great, you'll get exactly those measurements. But maybe instead of 21 stitches over 4 inches, you're getting 20 stitches or 20 and a half stitches. That amount will make a difference. So your thing might come out a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. So you can take that cast on number and say, at my gauge, that's actually going to be an inch or two bigger or smaller, so that you can determine how much each you're actually getting from your garment. So these sorts of calculations you can do all in advance of the knitting to see if it's going to fit you like you want it to. If it doesn't, If it's something simply stockinette, often you can add or subtract a few stitches. If it has a pattern repeat, you might need to do some thinking about that, but we'll set that aside for the moment. Another thing that you want to think about in terms of fit, Jen was talking about bust size and how shoulder size doesn't change very much. So what's the difference between somebody who, like I have a friend who's a designer who's a bodybuilder. She makes things with more room up here because that's a niche that wasn't really out there. And other people, their 28 inches might be mostly their rib cage. Somebody's 40 inches might be mostly rib cage. Somebody else might be very petite, but with a large bust. Those aren't going to fit the same. So when you look at a schematic, take a look at the shoulder measurement. This is a bad example because this is a huge oversized drop shoulder sweater, but that's for another comment. So you look at the shoulder measurement and then make an adjustment if you need to for your bust. Because what you don't want, if you're having a nice set-in sleeve for a nice fitting sweater, but you have a 44-inch bust and your shoulder is down here somewhere, you want to choose your size for your shoulder so that you get a good fit on your garment. And then if you need to increase in your sleeve shaping or add some bust darts to help your bust fit, then that's an adjustment you can make. Since I am wearing a drop shoulder sweater, I will talk for a minute about that too, because that's one of the easiest sweaters to make. If anybody's watching who's never made a sweater and you're worried about jumping in, a drop shoulder is the easiest place to start because you don't have any tricky shaping or fitting in sleeves. So you have your drop shoulder, and generally that's based on the bust measurement. And the larger the bust you have, the longer down your arm, your sleeve is going to start. You don't always want that though. So when I write a drop shoulder pattern, I actually make it a modified drop for certain sizes. So the middle of the range, as Jen said, where the patterns used to be just here's the middle, that's a straight drop shoulder. But for a smaller bust, you'll actually want to add some stitches so that your shoulder still starts here. Otherwise, it would be starting way up here. If you have a larger bust, you want to go up to here and then bind off some stitches and then set your shoulder in. So again, it starts here because we all want the thing that looks like the picture. If the model has her sleeve starting about here in her cute little drop shoulder, you don't want yours to start here or start here. So if that's not already in the pattern, you can make that adjustment. You can say, I'm going to knit my body up and then cut in and then add your sleeve later. That's a simple adjustment. And the last quick adjustment I'll measure is, again, I'll use this as an example. This was a super quick, I don't even want to think about it, using my scraps during lockdown sweater. I saw somebody on Instagram do it. I'm like, that looks cute. And it was straight across on the back. You can't quite tell, but it's a straight across thing. There's no shaping whatsoever. A lot of sweaters you may see have a little back neck shaping like this. And the reason for that is our bodies do this a little bit, whether it's texting or looking at your laptop or just getting older. Little kids are straight up and down. As we get older, our heads start to tilt forward. And if you have this space here, you're going to want to be doing this. Or if it naturally does this and it's going to be sliding down to fit around your neck. So these adjustments, you want to have a little bit back neck shaping. And that's a place that you want to look at the construction of the pattern to see how easy is that for me to add? Can I put in a little indent, just like a front neck? Or is that going to be too complicated? Full disclosure, I don't design top-down seamless sweater, so I'm not sure how you would change it for that, but somebody else I'm sure has that knowledge. For me, it's just a matter of putting in a little back neck shaping if I need to. So I think those are the biggest things that I would look at. I'm just checking my notes here. Yeah.
Mary Beth, I'm going to interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you would look at the construction notes to learn about some of the structure in the sweater.
Sure. So the structure of the sweater. So you can get a sweater that is all in one piece, or you can get a sweater that is knit in separate pieces and sewn together. So like this one is put together along the shoulders and added. I like seams because it means that I only have to knit on something smaller and then sew it together. Or it also gives structure. So if you have a sweater that looks great when it's laying flat, but as soon as you put it on, that fabric loosens and it slides down, then the fit might not be what you want once you actually put it on your body. So you want to consider, because that's something too. People say, oh, I got gauge, but it doesn't look like that because you're using a different yarn that might get the same gauge, but it doesn't behave the same way. So that, I believe, was another topic. Somebody's talking about yarn. Oh, Ashley Wempy is talking about yarn substitution. So check out that one. That's an interesting video to watch, because that's going to affect your fit also. So think about the density of the fabric that you're getting. But you mentioned construction notes, so I'll try to stick on topic. So the places that you, I think I'll say this, the construction notes will tell you a little bit about how you're making it so that you know what adjustments you can make. So like when I mentioned the drop shoulder, your sleeve is a separate piece. Maybe your arms aren't the same length as the pattern designs. That very often happens because you can have a different bust size, but nobody knows how long your arms are. So you can look at that and go, oh, okay, that sleeve is a separate piece. I just need to change the shaping rate, because once I get to, say, a sleeve cap of a set-in sleeve, that's going to be the same. But I want to change how quickly my increases or decreases are. And so you can look at that bit of construction and say, since that's a separate piece, I can change that sleeve to fit my arm length or my arm width. Maybe you want more or less room around your biceps. So those things will tell you where you can make little adjustments on the separate pieces. If you have something contiguous, again, you can look and go, okay, I want it to be a raglan, but I need to change my increase or decrease rates for the body or for the sleeve. And so you can, the idea is to do that stuff before you start knitting so that it's a better experience for you once you get going.
And that's where that muslin can help, right?
Absolutely.
And reading that schematic, I think a lot of newer knitters blow right past it, but that schematic is going to be your key to making sure that the garment works for you. So a couple more notes from the size inclusive design practices and what goes into creating the value that you're looking for in a size inclusive design. First of all, the schematic should not be a set of 3 or 4 measurements, right? It should be a robust schematic. It should tell you how that garment is going to fit each part of your body, right? The designer has those measurements. They should be sharing them. You cannot design a sweater without knowing what all of those stitch counts are, and you know what the gauge is, and you need that all calculated in order to do the yardage. So it's not like it's any additional work to provide that to the knitter. It should be in there. Second, the gold standard for size inclusive design and schematics is to share that schematic before the knitter buys it. Knitters deserve to be able to see what they're buying. You go into like a discount big box store, you know what you're going to pay and you can see the thing that you're going to pay for. How much more is that true when you're about to invest 100 hours of your time and a chunk of your cash in the materials, right? So, designers who are serious about serving knitters in the largest and smallest bodies, and in fact, all knitters, should be sharing that information up front. So if the pattern doesn't have a schematic included within the pattern, I would skip that. That's a red flag. And if it's not available before you buy it, I would just send them a message, send the pattern seller a message, and let them know that you're looking for that information before you make a purchase. They should be willing to provide that information to you. The only other thing I wanted to add is, one of the things that can really impact fit is what we do with our necklines. So sometimes we cast on a sweater and we start here at the neckline and then we just work straight down. I recommend not doing that. So if your pattern has the neckline knit as part of the project, as part of the cast on, skip that and go right to working the first row of the pattern structure and then come back and pick it up and knit it. There's 2 reasons for that. One, that pickup edge gives you structure where it's needed most. We have a straight line where weight falls directly from our shoulders, but we interrupt that line with a neckline. So we lose the integrity of our structure with our neckline and we need a way to put that back in. That picked up edge is how we do that. Second, listen, it's just really heartbreaking to cast on and then knit down and then realize that your ribbing is too loose or too wobbly or it doesn't look great or it doesn't lay flat. You want to be able to tear out just the ribbing, not the whole sweater if you don't like the ribbing. So open your pattern, look at the instructions after the ribbing when it says change to your working yarn or begin working in pattern. If the stitch count has changed, get that stitch count and then go from there. Go back later and pick up those stitches. Which kind of leads me to my next topic, right? all this talk about schematics is only as good as our ability to create fabric in the dimensions it needs to be, right? So, the schematic can look great on paper, but if we can't create that in our fabric using the stitch counts and the gauge, we're going to be in trouble. So, Beth is going to tell us a little bit more about why gauge is so important when you make a sweater.
I would argue if you're making anything other than maybe a shawl, right, or a blanket.
Yes, thank you for the correction.
uh, so, first of all, what is gauge? And gauge is simply, it's always defined in a pattern. If there's no gauge in that pattern, please throw it away. I don't even know what the designer was doing if there's no gauge. But gauge is the definition of how many stitch per inch or per 4 inches or in centimeters, depending on the designer. And hopefully your designer has both inches and centimeters in the pattern. So you want to match their gauge. That's how they knit the garment. That's how they calculated their sizes. And that's how they know how many stitches are needed for each size. So if you don't meet gauge, you're going to wind up with a garment that doesn't match what the designer intended. It's probably not going to fit you, probably not going to fit anybody you know. A story I really like to tell is I knit myself a sweater when I was in high school. It was a beautiful fisherman knit, had cables everywhere. It would have fit Andre the Giant. It was huge. It went to my ankles. My sleeves started at my elbows, and I wore it out of spite because I had spent so long making it. But it looked ridiculous. And it's because I didn't swatch. I had no idea what my gauge was. I was 17 and I just knit a sweater and I thought it was amazing. So don't be me, knit a gauge swatch, understand whether or not you're meeting what the designer intended. And I know it can be frustrating, but if you don't meet gauge the first time, try again with a different needle size or a different yarn. When you're knitting your gauge swatch, you want to understand the relationship between the stitch density and the fabric. So if you're knitting thick yarn and you have too many stitches or you have too few stitches and you need to size down your needle to fit more stitches into an inch, is that going to be too dense of a fabric? So do you want to change the yarn and the needle? Or do you just want to change the needle? These are things that you need to think through when you're thinking through gauge. It is a lot, but as you do it a couple times, it gets to be more natural and it gets to just flow a little bit for your process. I am also a knitter who doesn't like to cut their yarn. So I would highly suggest when you make your first gauge swatch, don't cut your yarn. You can just tie a little knot so that the stitches don't come out and soak it so that you can block it and get the true gauge. And then if it meets, cool. If you want to cut the yarn, go ahead and cut the yarn. If it doesn't meet gauge, you can reuse that yarn for your next gauge swatch. Couple tricks if you don't meet gauge. If it's a simple pattern, you can recalculate. You can redo the math. So if you know, okay, it's supposed to be 20 stitches per 4 inches, but I'm getting 21 stitches per 4 inches. You then do the math and you say, okay, so if it's 100 stitches total, I have 105 stitches. How off from gauge is that? How many inches or centimeters different is that? And is there a size that meets the ease I want, the ease requirements I want, that I can then modify and maybe knit that size and just go standard with that size? Or how do I change the pattern? You can knit extra repeats if it's the row gauge that's off and your stitch count is on. Row gauge tends to be a lot fiddlier than stitch gauge. So just know that going in, a lot of people don't meet row gauge from the designer's gauge. And that can be the most frustrating part for people when they're trying and trying and trying. And I've got stitch gauge, but I'm 2 rows off. What do I do? Knit 2 extra rows per repeat. Make your life a little easier. Yeah, I think that
Thank
kind of
you.
covers it. I don't want to babble.
Yeah, so a lot of people are talking about blocking and their gauge changes through their projects. So I'm just going to address some of the things that are coming up in the chat. Make a big swatch. 4 inches is how you measure it, but it's not the size of the swatch you should be making. For reference, designers will make swatches that are 12 by 12, right? We don't want you to do that. We know you're not going to do that, but make it at least 6 inches. You want at least an inch on either side of that 4-inch square that you're going to measure. So make your gauge swatch and then measure it before you block it. because that's how you're going to be able to tell if your gauge changes when you're knitting or if your fabric changes when you block it. So that's called your working gauge. You'll measure it before you block it. That's your working gauge. When you block it, let it really soak. Let it soak for a good hour, right? Let those fibers really be who they want to be, and then don't pin them. Put them in a hard, smooth surface to dry so that they dry the way that the yarn actually wants to be. Then measure your final gauge. The pattern will always tell you final gauge. But if you're knitting and you're like, I'm not sure that this is going to be what I think it'll be, you may look and find that your gauge changes 20% once you block it. So make both a working and a blocking gauge, and that's going to help you. Another tip is a lot of knitters who are just embarking on larger projects are either they can be very resistant to patterns like stockinette where you're maybe knitting flat, and so there's a purl side and a knit side, and your gauge changes and you're rowing out. So if you're still grappling with gauge consistency, maybe look for things where you're knitting and purling on both sides so that you don't have a right side and a wrong side where your gauge differences matter so much. So that's a tip. In size inclusive design, one of the things that we're keeping an eye on is how the weight of the garment is going to impact the garment structure, but also how it's going to impact gauge, right? If you pull on a knit swatch, what happens? It stretches. As garments get bigger, they get heavier, and yarn choice impacts that. One of the main ways that we have to keep an eye on that and adjust in size inclusive design is looking at the weight of the sleeves on the neckline and the weight of the garment on the overall body and sleeve length, right? So as we pull laterally on a garment this way, our necklines are going to get taller and wider, right? So there's some finessing that goes in, some art and experience that goes into how much to adjust those larger sizes narrower and deeper, knowing that that's going to happen and adjusting the sleeves just a tad bit shorter for that. And then in the smallest sizes, doing the exact opposite, right? So not counting on the weight of the sleeves to impact the fit some. And then another consideration is, are we recommending as designers a yarn that can be, for the construction we've chosen, size inclusive? Can it be, right? Can a worsted weight, slippery yarn like superwash merino be size inclusive in the top sizes? Will it lose its shape entirely? Will that knitter have an experience that's anything like the experience in a size 2 or a size 3? So thinking about the combination of yarns, how they work together. If a designer comes to me and they really want to do that design, that heavy, slippery yarn in a seamless design, then we've got to start talking about making multiple swatches. One that we're going to use at the top where there's going to be the most weight on it, and that'll be a very weighted swatch. We'll dry it with something hanging on it, all the way down to the swatch that we'll get the gauge for at the hem, where the garment does not have anything pulling on the stitches. So there can be a lot of blending. There's a lot that goes into yarn combos, gauge, and size inclusive design. But I am watching our time. We have 20 minutes left, and I have 3 more topics I want to cover. So, Lisa, we've been talking so much about the dimensions of the garment, but can you tell us a little bit about taking the measurements of the body and how somebody can do that at home and what they need to know?
Well, if you're going to measure yourself, the first thing I tell everybody is get a friend to help you. That's the easiest way to get accurate measurements. Make it a measuring party if you need to. Make a mimosa and have a friend help you take your measurements. Get a new tape measure because tape measures over time can stretch out a little bit. They can get a little bit weird. Get a new tape measure and get a good set of measurements. Also, get a tape measure that fits your body. My hips are 60 inches around. So I use a 120-inch tape measure. That way I can get one measure. I don't have to go to as far as the tape measure goes and then guesstimate the rest. Get a tape measure that fits what you need for your body. Easiest way to get one of those is 120 inches. Dritz makes them, and they're quilters tape measures. Get a good body chart so you can take all the measurements at once. What I like to do is do personalized measurements. So like someone said earlier, no one knows how long your arms are. Arms are very individualistic. So what I like to do is I know what sleeve lengths I like to make, And just because a sweater is written with a particular sleeve length doesn't mean I have to knit it that way. So I take my short sleeve measurement that I like on my body. I take my 3/4 length sleeve measurement, and I know where exactly I like a sweat sleeve to hit on my wrist. So I know exactly what that measurement is for myself. And I keep that as part of my personal body measurements. I also like, turns out I like a crop top. So I had to find my ideal spot to land a crop. So I also know where my measurements are for the lengths of sweaters I like to wear. And you can easily get that from just measuring your favorite sweaters or your favorite tops. We all have those tops. That's the one we grab when we know we want to look a certain way. Measure that top and compare it to your body measurements. That will also tell you how much ease you like to wear. Because when I do my sweater class, I do a class called Sweater Savvy. One of the things we do is we measure our go-to garment. And so many knitters are very, very surprised when they realize, hey, I wear sweaters with negative ease all the time. This is my favorite sweater. So now you can transfer your preferred measurements to whatever garment you're making. And that's another thing you can do with that schematic. You can copy the schematic, keep the measurements that work, and mark what measurements you're going to change. Put your own measurement on that schematic so that now you have a personalized schematic that you can use a map based on your own body measurements to creating that sweater that's going to fit the way you want it to fit on you. Just because it went down to the top of the model's thighs doesn't mean that's where you want your sweater to go. Or maybe you saw the sweater, it was cropped. You like the fact that it came in at an angle, but you want it to be longer. And you know where on your body, maybe you like it 3 inches below your natural waist. You know, that's every sweater you wear looks great in that spot. Make it to that spot, but you need to know where that spot is. And that's why you would take a really good full set of measurements. Did I say everything I wanted to say? I think so. I think
I
that's
think that's a really great answer. And Lisa, you brought up something that I was hoping would come up today, which is that, there's a lot of different skills we're talking about here. We're talking about reading a schematic, getting gauge, understanding ease, understanding, the physics of bodies and weight. And, it's kind of a huge toolkit. But for people who are overwhelmed and they're just starting and they want to make sure that they're going to create something that fits them, pull out that pattern, pull out your favorite sweater and just choose the one that's closest, right?
Yeah.
Just do that. Just get started.
Can I add one more thing?
Of course.
We were talking about visualizing the pattern on you earlier. And one of the things I found that really helps me visualize the actual thing on myself is I make a little sketch. I am not an artist by any means. You do not have to be good at drawing to do this. But I got a really cute little body model. I took a really good set of measurements and I sent it off to my body model, and they gave me a little fashion sketch of me.
That's right.
And I absolutely love it. So what I do is when I see a pattern that I like, um, don't laugh, but here's my little sketch of me,
Yep.
my little cropped cardigan. So now I'm not looking at that on the model, I'm looking at it on me, and here's my finished one. Oh, there's my
Look
red
at
light.
that. Yeah, and this
So
ties right back to what
knew
Hortense was saying, right? Where we want to make sure that we're going to wear the things that we're making, and
but
being able to visualize them helps with that.
exactly. And I knew exactly where I wanted it to be cut off. It wasn't cut off in the same place as on the model, but on me, I love it.
Yeah.
Here's another cropped sweater. This is the Any Day sweater on my little body model. And then, and here it is on me.
What is it mybodymodel.com?
My body model.
Yeah, mybodymodel.com.
And
Is
she
that a
creates custom
one-time
ones.
purchase?
Hmm?
Is that a one-time
Yes,
purchase,
it's a
Lisa?
one-time
It is.
purchase. You can download it. You get many, many variations of it in different sizes. So let's say you wanted to test out 3 or 4 ideas. You could have a very small one and test out 3 or 4 ideas for how to modify that particular thing. But the cool thing is you're not visualizing the garment on someone else. You're visualizing it on you. And I find that that makes so much difference because sometimes you'll just say, nah, I don't like that. Or you'll
That's
go,
right.
wait a minute. Oh, I think that'll be great if I just take it to my high hip
Yep.
or if I crop it or whatever modification you want to make. You can test your modifications out on paper, which is so much faster than knitting.
Yes, Lisa, I had a very similar, I had an aha moment this week where I was making an illustrated post about vests from set-in sleeves. And I was like, wait a minute, I thought I didn't want vests, but now look at this, I do. So
Mhm.
for folks who maybe, another way you can do this at home is you can simply take your laptop, your tablet, bring up a picture of yourself wearing skin-tight clothes and trace it. Put a piece of paper on that thing and trace it, and then make some copies. Make some copies at 30% so those lines are nice and light. You don't have to be a good drawer to do this. You
No.
can even take multiple with some of the sweater types you like to wear so that you're not trying to invent the garment that goes on there if you really aren't confident with your drawing skills. But like nobody's going to see this. It can be just for you, right?
Yeah, and generally they are just for me, but I brought it up because sometimes what you're disappointed in the garment is not that the garment isn't a good garment on you necessarily, it's that it didn't turn you into the person you saw in the picture. So we have to
Yeah.
separate those two things. So it's best to be able to visualize it on yourself as
And
you
we know
are.
a lot of makers have a lot of dysphoria, either about their measurements or about the way that their bodies show up in comparison to the way that they view themselves, or because they've kind of got like some chronic stuff and they're just completely dissociated from their body from the neck down. When
Mhm.
I run my workshops on wardrobe, people are always like, I look like that. I was like, you do, though. That's what you look like. Pictures don't
Yeah.
lie. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm just going to throw in a few designer perspectives. Forgive me for talking fast. I'm going to try and limit myself to make sure we have time for our last questions. Um, when your body is close to a skeleton size, there's not a lot of variation, right? But as we begin to deposit tissue on our skeletons, we have a lot more unique variation in where we deposit that tissue, right? So those differences kind of get magnified as we go up the size range. If you've ever gone into a department store and looked at their plus size clothes and been like, wow, these are all shapeless sacks. Listen, it's not because people in plus size bodies are shapeless. It's because manufacturers are trying to create something that fits everybody poorly rather than fitting one person really well. And so where a designer draws that line between I know who I'm designing for and what they're looking for, um, and I'm designing something that's going to fit them impeccably versus I want everybody able to be able to access this. Kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier with looking for designers who design for your body type, even if it's not the same size, right? So that's a tip that you can use, and a little bit more of that like work and trade-off and assessment that goes into size of inclusive design. um, and I also want to say that size inclusion isn't just on designers, right? If your local yarn store is not stocking 120-inch tape measures, but is stocking 60-inch ones, why is that? Maybe they don't know, right? So, we can always encourage other people in the community to take responsibility for those futures that we all want to see exist. Um, let's not forget about kids. Hortense, do you want to tell us about some of the unique fit issues that we see in kids and how folks can make sure that they're creating great fitting garments for the kids in their lives or
Yeah.
accessories?
So yeah, I saw a comment earlier, someone saying just make something for a baby and it doesn't matter if it's like not right, it will work. Up to a certain point, yes, tiny humans look cute in anything you make. But once they start growing, so for babies, it works because they don't have a choice. But my sons are 2 and 4 now and get very picky and decide what they're gonna wear, and you don't want a tantrum. So if you want them to actually enjoy wearing what you're gonna make for them, um, I don't know about teenagers. They're not there yet, so I don't have any experience there, but I'm talking about small children. They like things that are comfortable. So they like it when it's easy to put their head in the sweater, which may sound stupid, but small kids and babies have way bigger head compared to their bodies than adults do. So if you just take like an adult sweater and like do decrease it like proportionally, just like, oh, I'll just take the smallest size and instead of making it in worsted weight, I'll make it in fingering and it will be a baby sweater. It's not gonna work. That head is never gonna fit. If you look at stores, store-bought like sweaters, most of them for babies and kids, like small children, have some sort of way to open up the neck even more because you don't want to for the head to fit, then the sweater starting there and they don't have anything to like keep them warm anywhere around their shoulders, and then it's going to fall off their shoulders. So I like designs that have like either buttons, they can be on the side, they can be in the back, or have like a V-neck. But even a V-neck, like I have a classic little boy V-neck sweater. And the first sample I made, my son has a very big head. He couldn't fit in, so I made a new one. And always use like a stretchy bind off on the collars for kids because they are not going to be careful with their clothes. The other area that I like to pay attention to is around the arms and I don't know, armhole. I don't know how it's called, but like this area. Sorry, English is my third language, so sometimes words don't come.
We got you.
But around this area, they move a lot more than we do. We sit at our desk, we walk, we chat. We don't do this all day. They do. So if your sweater doesn't move here easily, they're not going to wear it. And if your seams are tight, they're going to throw it in the trash and be like, no, you're not allowed to make me sweaters anymore, mom. But if you make it too not structured, so we were talking earlier about like adding structure here. I think it's especially true for like kids sweaters. They move a lot and they dirty their clothes a lot. So you need to wash them a lot, which is going to wear your sweater even more. So although they're going to grow out of it pretty quickly, if you want it to fit their little brother or sisters or like nieces and nephews, because you take so much time like knitting for your grandkids and you want everyone to enjoy it, having some structure also is super helpful for them. And then the last area that I like to focus on is the wrists. Their tiny hands can fit easily, but if it's too tight here, they're not going to be able to like put it on and off very easily. You don't want to have to dress your kids when they're 4. Trust me.
Right. Thank you, Hortense. I'll add here, I'm going to chime in because I want to make sure that we have time to talk about accessories. When we're designing for adults, you know, we have one person who's roughly 5'4" in our size charts, and she's 12 different sizes, or he's 12 different sizes, depending on the chart you're working from. In kids, each age size has a different height and a different weight. Kids' patterns are inherently not size inclusive. So I'll talk to people who are like, why do they think my 2-year-old has such long arms? It's like, well, you know, maybe your kid is, like I was, 90th percentile for height and 5th for weight. Like you're not going to be in 2 sizes. There's going to be some adjustment. And the other note is that kids grow longer faster than they grow wider. So anything you can do to get some extra length that you can take advantage of later is going to improve your longevity for those patterns. So
I just had like one tiny
Yep.
final note for baby sizes. When it says size 6 months, this is for like patterns and like shop items. It means up to 6 months. So if your grandkid is going to be 6 months this summer and you're making a summer sweater, make it size 12 months because the 6 month is not going to fit because it's up to 6 months. So it's going to be too small from the get-go.
that's right. Assuming that they're the same size as, you know,
Yeah,
that size chart
of course.
measurement, right? All right, so you guys have already heard loud and clear my garment bias because I'm a garment knitter, but we do have plans to talk about accessories. I'd love it, Cynthia, if you could close us up here with our last topic. How do we make sure our accessories fit? You know, mittens and hats, they've got to fit us too. You're on mute.
There we go. Someday I'll learn to use Zoom. Yeah, so everything has to fit. It doesn't matter. Even the scarf behind me has to fit. You want the scarf as wide as you want it. You want it as long as you want it. And a lot of times when people come into my yarn shop, they'll say, I'm going to make a scarf. How much yarn do I need? And the answer is always, how wide do you want it and how long do you want it? And then we can come up with a possibility for yarn choices. Hats also have to fit. And also everything is personal preference, which we sort of alluded to earlier. But I have a head that does not like anything touching it. I don't like to wear barrettes. I don't like to wear hairbands. I really actually don't like to wear hats, even though I've designed tons of them. And so when I make a hat for myself, I always make it too big because otherwise, if it's kind of squeezing in on my head, I won't wear it at all. So a hat that might fit a head that's my size is not my preference. So I think we need to think about that too all the time is, you know, what do you want in a hat? and what do you want in a scarf, and what do you want in mittens. There have been times I've made my mittens with the cuffs too long, thinking that that would be a great idea and warm, and then I end up rolling them down. So you have to kind of find your way on everything you do, I think. So, and
I
I
love
should
that.
really quickly, I have a poncho here. I should talk about that quickly too, because this is an accessory that a lot of people don't think about fit because it's a poncho. But if you're making the kind of poncho that's made out of two rectangles that is sewn together, if you're plus sized, the sides get stretched in here and wrinkly around the neck. So when I designed this one, with a friend, I added a panel to the arms so that it created almost a sleeve. And so there's a lot of things you have to really figure out, unfortunately, sometimes through trial and error, whether they fit or not. So,
Yeah. And then Cynthia, this is another place where size inclusion comes in ways that people don't consider, right? So, how are we addressing the changes in calf measurements for socks as the body gets larger, right? How are we choosing which measurements to grade our ponchos on, right? Like, is cross shoulder the right measurement or is shoulder circumference the right measurement? Like, how are we going to do that? And then how are we going to give the knitter good instructions? One of the things that comes up is scaling, right? Is it more, how do we deal with motifs versus white space, right? Like, there are all sorts of things that come up when we're talking about accessories, particularly accessories. And then, as you noted, there are also different ways that designers are trying to serve their knitters to be inclusive that are not size inclusion, right? Like, do we have enough room in the hats that we're making for everyone's hair, right? How are we making sure that we're creating things that are sensory friendly for our neurodivergent friends or for anybody who has a sensory preference, but particularly for people who have, really sensory processing differences. You can always layer a sweater, but it's hard to layer a hat. Not impossible. I've done it. So there are lots of different things that can go into making sure that we're serving those people well. And accessories are places where we don't have as robust of information behind the scenes for grading those size inclusive patterns. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
yeah, and I'll add one thing that yesterday in the panel, I said that one of the things that you have to do as a designer is learn math. But I would argue that unfortunately, as a knitter, probably it's helpful. The more you can kind of get into the math of things, which is really all we've been talking about today, the better.
Yeah, I've been a CPA, licensed CPA for about 13, 14 years now. And I do so much more math as a working artist than I ever did as an accountant, which makes sense, but still, it's like I'd be dusting off that trig. So, one of the things I've also been learning over the last year is just how playing with different ways that we can do this visually, right? Where can we say, what I see is good enough? Where can I just like look at my body and say, it starts to get wider there and it stops getting wider there. So I'll just throw in some increases, right? It's important not to get too precious and to leave some room for play and experimentation. Each sweater is just practice for the next one. There's no capstone. You don't win. You just keep learning and experimenting and, eventually you get a muscle memory for it. We are at time. Uh, Thank you to all the attendees and all the panelists and everyone in the chat. What a great, supportive, beautiful, helpful conversation. I can't wait to go back through and read all the comments from the chat. And I know that I personally will be in the Facebook group some over the weekend, responding to questions both on my presentation and to kind of continuing this conversation about fit, right? We started a post with some questions and there's some great juicy stuff in there. So you can either scroll back to find that or maybe we can pin it, Jessica. And also, Jessica has generously offered, a lot of us have written some good content for you about fit throughout our time. And so we'll be sharing some things, some additional resources that you can pursue.
Yeah, so I'm going to take, when I have the recording ready, I'm going to add it to our schedule page up at the top, and then I'll add links. So anyone who has a link, send it to me, email me, or send it in Slack, or I don't know if smoke signals will work, but however else. And I want to share just my biggest takeaway, which I think comes from when I wrote my first sweater pattern, and what I've learned over the years from Jen is that I think as beginner garment knitters or accessory knitters, you have this many have this expectation that the pattern has to fit me out of the box. I don't have to do anything. I just have to pick a size and it's going to fit me no matter what. And that is not, most of the time is not the case. Even if it's the sleeve length that you want to change, which is probably one of the most common, or the body length because you're taller or shorter than the model that the designer based it on. So as a knitter, you get to pick your size, but then you also get to customize it so that it fits you the way that you want it to fit. And that's the beauty of getting to make your own pieces, is that you have that flexibility. You're not stuck with, if whatever clothing store that you're shopping in has picked a sleeve length, but that doesn't work for you. So making your own gives you that flexibility, which is really the beauty of it and a wonderful thing. So sometimes you're in between sizes and you add some more rows, or like we talked about, a couple extra stitches.
I need to excuse myself. I just wanted to
Yes,
say
I know
thank you.
you have that hard stop. So from here, I am going to release our designers to go take care of whatever it is that they want to do, if they want to hang out or have very busy lives and other things to take care of, especially our shop owners. Thank you for taking time. I know how hard that is when you're in a store. And I am going to take another sip of water because my throat is not so great. And then I will, I'm going to give you a tour of my Stitch Society classroom. So you can hang out if you'd like, or you can hop off. What I'm going to do to give us a clean recording is I'm going to stop this recording. You can stay put. You don't have to leave the Zoom, but just for recording purposes, I am going to stop the recording and then restart it. So it'll be two separate things. So if you are a new Stitch Society member, if you've signed up for the trial, if let's see if I can get that to work. Okay, so I am going to stop the recording and I'm going to